I want to bring you back to that breaking news in Martinez this afternoon. Health officials say the Martinez refinery released petroleum coke dust into the air today. Those particles from the dust now in the surrounding neighborhoods, and people are being told to avoid touching or even breathing in this material. Joining us now on the phone is Dr. Sophie Mercuria. Doctor, can you talk to me just a little bit about, first and foremost, what is petroleum coke dust?
Petroleum coke dust is the byproduct of kind of refining process, and it's taking out, and the release is expected that it happened towards the end of the process, and it's really already been taken out, and so expected to be mostly carbon with trace metals, and that we expect that, and so we're doing further investigation on the substance that was released.
Okay.
But in terms of what we know, the MRC, the Martinez Refinery Company, reported through the community warning system this morning that there was a release of material with coke dust, and as you mentioned, a byproduct of the petroleum refining process. The release happened maybe around 8:30, and it was brief, and so there's no more active release happening, and it did result in dust deposited to the surrounding neighborhoods. And so we are advising that as we do further investigations to avoid having close contact to the material. But the breathing in of the aspect was mostly during the release, and so we don't expect any concerns in terms of breathing in. But if people were around during the release or they're unsure and they have other health conditions and they're finding that maybe it's being exacerbated, to follow up with their healthcare provider or the risk department if appropriate.
Okay, so people don't need to be wearing masks if they need to take the dog out this afternoon. It's just there's an issue with potentially touching the material, though, correct?
Yeah, we think it's likely if it's during the coke process. So again, we're doing further testing and write test samples for analysis of the materials. But we expect to have those results later this week and more information as well, but not to avoid kind of touching or having close contact with the material.
Okay. How could this affect people's overall health? I mean, if you're a generally healthy person and you were out there earlier today and you did potentially breathe this in, are there certain symptoms you might be feeling this afternoon that you want to be aware of?
As you mentioned, we're kind of doing a further analysis to make sure it's kind of just the coke process and the end of the coke process are really some trace metals, which we, have background trace metals and outside, but mostly carbon, if that's the case, and there isn't necessarily a lot of health effects. But if individuals have like asthma or other things, and they were out when it during the release, it could potentially like exacerbate or kind of cause some like respiratory symptoms or something like that, or other health conditions. But more to come as we review the analysis and see if there's anything else that we don't expect, or it's more than just the trace metals.
Okay. Is this coke dust, is it black? Is it a white filmy substance? What should people avoid touching?
So from our team is still doing the investigations, but the material is kind of it can be a little sooty, so a little more black, but there is trace amounts. So during the normal coke process, it's essentially just steam lighting up, and then if there's a little more of the coke in it than expected, the release might look more gray, so like a little more gray, and that's what potentially is important in terms of the end of the process. And so they might see a little more like gray or kind of set on the surfaces, but we're continuing to kind of review the extent and kind of taking the test as mentioned.
Okay. Obviously, last year, I know you all did a big investigation about another release that was, really bad for the surrounding communities. Those communities who were affected last year, is that kind of the radius of those neighboring communities who should be aware of this, or is it wider this time around?
It's hard to say because we're just doing the analysis, and it all depends on wind patterns as well as where it was taken or if it was taken further. But, the areas kind of around the Martinez Refinery Company, we would expect then, but any area that they kind of see a little more substance or kind of this thing around them, our team is kind of doing the assessment currently and looking out to see kind of the area of potential exposure. So more to come.
Okay. Anything else that you want folks there in those surrounding neighborhoods to be aware of as they go about their day? I mean, is this something that can be cleaned up in the next, day or two, or will they need to be aware of this for the rest of the week in terms of, I assume it's probably not great to maybe even take your dog out for a walk because then your dog could potentially, their paws, that sort of thing. So how much longer do you think folks should be cautious?
Yeah, I think we'll have more information in the next day or so. We're just taking the testing samples, and potentially even after we have those samples, we could review how it can potentially be cleaned up or next steps, but more information that we're hoping to have. We won't have the results probably until the end of the week, but I think we would have more information and next steps for the community in the next couple of days.
Okay. Dr. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. Again, that petroleum coke dust released from the Martinez refinery, it happened earlier this morning, so the release is not active anymore, but the remnants are still there in the surrounding communities. So Contra Costa Health just wanting folks in those neighboring communities to be aware to, not touch any of the sooty dust that they may be seeing in their communities. Dr. Sophie, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.